basically a G2 world dominated by the United States and China going forward over the next 10 years. Let's get more perspective on this and bring in Ian Bremmer. He's with, of course, the Eurasia Group and an author of his own risk report for 2013. Good to see you.
Hey, John.
The premise of our report here is the fact that it's the U.S. dominant, China dominant. We'll get to the growth scenarios going forward, but what does it mean having two pillars like this who don't see eye to eye geopolitically, in your view?
Well, one's much less of a pillar. China, no question, is by far the largest and most important economy in the emerging markets. It's bigger economically than all the rest of the BRICS, including South Africa, put together.
Yeah,
so how do you talk about the BRICS? You should be talking about China and how are they doing. But of course, the rise of China has enormous implications for both economic conflict and political conflict, precisely because this is a poor country. It's an authoritarian country. It's a state capitalist country. And by the time China becomes the world's largest economy, surpassing the United States, those fundamental qualities of China will not particularly change. So here you have a situation where for many decades, America's felt that China's rise was in America's interests. Already, Japan understands that China's rise is not in its interest. It's a bad thing. Increasingly, the U.S. is very, very conflicted.
Well, you raise a very interesting point, because we're starting to see a new emerging relationships as a result of China. The Philippines reaching out to Japan with Shinzo Abe, because there's great concerns about the South China Sea and the East China Sea.
That's right.
Is that going to be a real flashpoint in 2013, 2014? I don't see the two sides coming together. In fact, the rhetoric's getting even worse as we speak.
Well, there's no question that the United States truly does not want a serious coming to blows between Japan and China, economically, security, or any other way. It's a problem for the U.S. But the Japanese, of course, have a new government. Shinzo Abe, the prime minister, back to the Liberal Democratic Party, is much more nationalist in tone. There's much more patriotism going on in Japan in general. But further, and perhaps most importantly, the Chinese feel that they don't need the Japanese the way they used to. They don't need the technology. They don't need the investment dollars. And furthermore, unlike places like Vietnam and the Philippines, where the Chinese have a very large diaspora population that really controls local business, so over time the Chinese feel they win no matter what.
Right.
In Japan, there are no Chinese businessmen that run they have no influence there. So it's much more be assertive, and if you need to, isolate these guys. China-Japan is by far the most important and consequential geopolitical conflict on our screen for the entirety of 2013.
Yeah, I think so as well. It's very interesting. Vladimir Putin trying to see eye to eye with the new Chinese leadership. They talk about increasing trade relations here from the east of Russia into China. Can you see a new partnership strategically between Russia and China after what we've witnessed in Syria in the last year and a half?
I mean, first of all, if there is a strategic partnership, it would have to be around economically, and it's going to be around energy. The problem is that the Chinese are not prepared to pay what the Russians want to sell their energy for. The Chinese are going to become a major unconventional energy player themselves. They have that capacity. They're starting to invest in it. Also, the sort of pipelines you're talking about you'd have to build to China are going to take a lot of years. They're incredibly expensive. And by the time you actually build them, China's domestic cost for energy is going to be through the floor. So, you know, even though there are lots of reasons why the Chinese and Russians both don't like the West, don't like what's happening in Europe or the United States, don't like what's happening in the Middle East at the behest of some of these countries.
Right.
That's very different from saying that China and Russia are going to cozy up. The interests just aren't aligned.
It's very interesting. Syria, you touched upon it here because of the relationship that Russia and both China have and the non-interventionist policy they have with regards to governments going forward. It's been a grand chess game with major players moving pieces around in Syria. Over 60,000 deaths. I don't see an exit strategy. Yes, Iran's on the table here. Turkey's there. Saudi Arabia's there. Qatar's there. The U.S. and the European Union dancing on the edge of the dance floor. Where do we go with Syria in 2013?
I mean, number one, it's not clear to me Russia has a non-intervention policy. They've been more than willing to provide military assistance to the Syrians. They clearly have a non-intervention by the West policy in Syria. It's a little bit different.
And also privately and publicly, I guess it's differently as well.
No question.
Yeah.
The Saudis came out today and said that they do not think it's remotely feasible that there is a negotiated settlement in Syria, a political outcome that can get Assad out or that can have peaceful governance. We're 60,000 dead. We've put a red line that says if they use chemical weapons to kill their civilians, well, then we're going to do something. NATO came out today, and Germany actually said that NATO would attack Syria if the Syrians were to attack Turkey, which is a step forward, and I haven't seen many people reporting on that yet. But still, if you ask me today, is Assad gone? Is he teetering? Is he on the way out? I mean, I wish I could say yes. I, in good conscience, can't say yes.
Very interesting. Final point here. In Africa, Algeria,
Yeah.
Mali,
Yeah.
Nigeria, Kenya. There's Islamic problems in each one of these countries right now with sparks of uprisings. Who was going to think 2 weeks ago that Mali and Algeria would be dominating the headlines worldwide? Are we well behind the curve of the al-Qaeda elements in Africa right now?
Well, I don't think they're dominating the headlines. Certainly on the United States, inauguration a lot more important than what's happening in Mali and Algeria, and that's part of the problem. The Americans have gone to the French and said, we are more than happy to offer transport planes to bring your French soldiers into Mali, drop them off, and then go back, right? I mean, the global war on terror is being wound down in the United States. Obama made that very clear in his inauguration speech. A second global war on terror is being wound up by the French. The only problem is Francois Hollande is looking around to Europe, but he's not getting support. I mean, the Spaniards, I think, provided one transport plane. Their army is broke. You know, this is a real problem. And ultimately, well, there's going to be clearly much instability in the Sahel, in the Sahara. But ultimately, the big risk may well be on Hollande himself. 65% approval in France, across bipartisan support for this intervention so far, but they're assuming it's going to be nice and short.
Yeah.
It's not. And
Well,
as this,
quoting him, he said it was not going to be France's Afghanistan, but we're not sure.
not Afghanistan, perhaps, but it's not going to be France's Libya either. And I think that the French population is not prepared for that.
Okay. Good to see you, yeah?
John, always
Thanks
a
very
pleasure.
much.
Sure.
Ian Bremmer, once again, of the Eurasia Group.